Good morning, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I'm going to be considering the unexpected link between multiple chemical sensitivity and POTS syndrome, and a crucial difference. Don't let me forget that. Now, you would not think, on the face of it, that multiple chemical sensitivity had much to do with POTS syndrome, in that it's generally thought that POTS syndrome is a cardiac condition, and it's quite clear, although not fully accepted everywhere, but it's quite clear that multiple chemical sensitivity is a neurological condition. Multiple chemical sensitivity, for those of you who don't know who are watching this, is a condition which essentially has very negatively impacted the brain's smell centers, okay, the olfactory centers in the brain, which happen to be in the limbic system. And what happens in multiple chemical sensitivity is that things like perfumes and soaps and exhaust fumes and all of those kind of things are processed in a very hypervigilant way by the limbic system, in a deeply sensitized way, such that they appear overpowering to the individual, okay, who has that problem in the brain. And they appear overpowering, and they also can be deeply harmful and noxious, and can give anaphylactic shocks and all kinds of horrible things, and certainly many kinds of allergic reaction. So someone with multiple chemical sensitivity who has a very heightened sense of smell, let's say, might go into a restaurant and will actually be hit by a sort of wall, as it were, of all the different perfumes that are in the room, whereas someone without multiple chemical sensitivity who has a neurotypical and healthily functioning olfactory centers in the limbic system will go into that same restaurant and won't smell a thing. So it's a deeply debilitating condition that really affects where people can be, and can be very dangerous. But you wouldn't necessarily, obviously, see the link between someone who has that problem and someone who has a very fast heart rate upon standing up. But there is a very important link, and I'm going to discuss that now. The main similarity is that both MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity, and POTS syndrome follow a traumatic event. That's the first big clue. They both follow a traumatic event. So, as we know with POTS syndrome, this tends to be a virus or something else that can be attributed as traumatic, such as another illness or surgery, pregnancy, or a crushing psychological trauma, such as a car accident or whatever. Anyway, so they both follow a trauma, okay? And MCS tends to follow a very specific kind of trauma. It tends to follow an exposure to chemicals in a very unfortunate incident. It tends to follow some kind of chemical poisoning. The result of this with MCS is that the parts of the limbic system to do with smell automatically rewire themselves to detect all other chemicals as potentially life-threatening. It's the limbic system trying to protect the person, but it slightly messes it up. But it's humbling to think that it's doing that, but it does slightly mess it up, and basically from that point forth, all chemicals become very dangerous to the person. But anyway, both follow a trauma, and that indicates that the part of the person which is affected is neurological, because it's the limbic system which is affected by events. It's not your hand necessarily, unless someone chops it off. It's the part of us which is perceiving the outside world, which is perceiving what is happening to us in the body. That's the part of us which can be affected by events. It's the nervous system, which is the brain, right? So that's what's affected. So that's a big clue. Okay, they're both affected by traumatic events. And I'll get into the actual differences, the specific differences in a moment, but I just want to talk about the real significance for this in terms of treatment for POTS, is that when we come to think about the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which is the program that I use to recover from POTS and other people are using, is that, interestingly, it was never developed for POTS syndrome. It was developed for multiple chemical sensitivity and electromagnetic hypersensitivity, but I'll go into that some other time. But it was developed for multiple chemical sensitivity, and by Annie Hopper, who had MCS, and who deduced that it must have been a neurological condition because it affected her ability to perceive stimuli, and the brain is what perceives stimuli. So anyway, she recovered from MCS using the program, and then taught other people with MCS, and they recovered using the program. But the thing is that at some point, and I'm going to have an interview with Annie Hopper about this, I hope, but at some point, someone came along who had both MCS and this condition called POTS. Okay, and they did the program, and the thing is that they recovered not just from the MCS but also from POTS, pointing to the fact that both had something similar going on, given that they are both something that affect the brain following a traumatic event. So that's rather a lucky find, isn't it? Program being used for something else, MCS, actually happened also to work for POTS. But what it points to is the fact that basically something very similar is going on. So both are forms of limbic system impairment. Although initially they follow a slightly different course. So this is an hypothesis I'm about to put forward. But basically, what I think is going on is that with multiple chemical sensitivity, the part of the brain, the part of the limbic system which is primarily affected by that is called the cingulate cortex. Okay? And the cingulate cortex is specifically the part which is responsible for perceiving outside stimuli and for processing our sense of smell. Okay? So it makes sense that a chemical exposure would lead to problems in the cingulate cortex because the chemical exposure will directly affect the smell centers of the limbic system. So it makes sense that primarily what goes wrong in chemical sensitivity are the smell centers. Now, with POTS, as you'll know from other videos that I've put forward in the book, it's the HPA axis that's primarily affected in the limbic system. That starts in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the most primitive part of the limbic system. It's very deep. Lower down in the brain, as it were. It connects down to the entire nervous system. And what's happening in POTS primarily is that the hypothalamus has gone into massive state of crisis. And when the hypothalamus goes into massive state of crisis, it orders the release of adrenaline non-stop, continuously, right? And that gets sent down via the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary gland adrenal gland axis. And what happens then, as I go into in other videos, is that this constant release of adrenaline overpowers the net protein, the norepinephrine reuptake transporter protein, norepinephrine being the same as adrenaline, and that leads to blood vessel dysfunction, which leads to the increased heart rate that you see in POTS patients. As I say, I go into that elsewhere. Now, so different parts of the brain are being affected initially by the trauma, okay? But they're both being affected by a trauma. One, the cingulate cortex, the smell centers, and the other is the HPA axis, or the hypothalamus. Okay. So, different things, but different initial effects. But it's important to mention that there's an initial effect, and then there's something that might happen later. Okay. So, and this is very important, because a lot of people with POTS syndrome do have chemical sensitivity as well. So you may say, well, okay, I have POTS and I'm somewhat sensitive to chemicals. They're overpowering to me. I want to get away from them, all that kind of thing. But I never had a chemical exposure. I was never poisoned by chemicals that could have initially led to being sensitive to chemicals. This is a very good objection, okay? But basically what happens is that once one part of your limbic system is affected adversely by a trauma, such that it goes into overdrive, what tends to happen then is something that's called limbic system priming, okay? Or limbic system kindling. Basically, the more sensitized and hypervigilant parts of the limbic system become, over time, that's like fire feeding fire, okay? So then you become more hypervigilant over time, unless you get treatment. And what this then tends to do is this tends to affect other parts of the limbic system. It starts to, as it were, seep into other parts of the limbic system. So you may start, in the case of POTS, with just having an overactive hypothalamus, okay? But then, over time, the increased hypervigilance from that eventually leads to an overactive cingulate cortex. And the overactive cingulate cortex will then make you chemically sensitive. This is what happened to me, basically. I mean, I didn't start off with chemical sensitivity, I started off with the hypothalamus problems. Okay, looking back now, I understand that, but the cingulate cortex became overactive at a later point. Remember, at a certain point, August 2014 it was, I was just washing my hands with soap, and then I suddenly started thinking, gosh, the manufacturers are making this stuff really powerful these days, you know. And then it started like that, and then later on I got more sensitive, and I started to sort of get a sense of the sort of being hit by chemicals, and then getting this sense in my mouth that I was being poisoned. Really bad taste, smell in my mouth. Luckily, it never got worse than that. Exhaust fumes as well were very difficult, but it never got worse. I know it can get really bad, and I'm lucky that it didn't get very bad. I also became minorly sensitive to electromagnetic stuff, but that was weird. Anyway, so that's what happens. So you can get kindling. So that's why a lot of people with POTS also have chemical sensitivity. It may not be as severe as someone who has primarily chemical sensitivity, but nevertheless they start to find that impacting them. So anyway, the point is, if you're watching this is the upshot of the video. Okay, the upshot of the video, very important. If you're watching this with POTS and you notice that you're also sensitive to chemicals, know that this is pointing to the fact that you have a neurological problem. As I say in other videos, I know this is hard, but it does mean there's a way out. Once you identify the problem, there's a way out. So take heart if that's the case, because what it shows is that POTS is also primarily neurological. And aren't we lucky, in a sense, that a program that was developed for something else altogether was also found to work for POTS. Very lucky indeed. It points to a shared neurological origin, which needs to be taken very seriously, and the full significance of which holds the key to understanding the whole condition. So that's all I wish to say about this topic. I hope it's given food for thought, and I'll see you in another video very soon.